Today I'm going to talk about feeding sheep again for several reasons. One, because that seems like what we do the most of. Like every day it's morning and night feeding sheep. So it's a big part of sheep farming. And another reason is that it's the question I get asked most about. What do we feed our sheep? How do we get them to get this size? What ration do I use? Things like that. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. We almost feel guilty because I see so many videos and hear so many people talking about these magical rations they use. They get in nutritionists and they sample their feed and do tests, and they use kelp and oats and barley and peas and corn and soybeans and alfalfa pellets and I don't know, ingredients I never even heard of for sheep too often get put in the mix, and adding salt and mineral to the feed as well. Sorghum, all these different types of plants, and all of them are good. You can feed anything to sheep, but what they are made for and designed for is grass. These animals are ruminants, and left to their own devices, they would eat grass. So if you have a form of grass in their diet, that's all they need. They will do fine with that. They will grow with that. They will be able to have lambs with that. But, and also, hi Gladiator. Hi Glad. How you doing, buddy? But if you want them to grow fast, or if you live in a climate like we do in Canada, where we can get terribly hot, dry summers, brutally cold, snowy winters, which result in limited grass, limited pasture. If you want them to grow to be like Glad, they couldn't possibly survive on pasture alone. And that's where we as shepherds come in. I've said before that sheep are not wild animals. They're domesticated animals. Thousands of years they would have descended from wild sheep and goats. But today they are not that. Today we're farming them, whether you like that idea or not. I understand people don't like farming animals, but it is a reality. As you can see, I love animals too. I have always been called an animal lover and a tree hugger, which were always meant to be derogatory terms, but which I always thought was a compliment because I'm proud to care about nature and the animals in it. But I'm also a farmer, which is a bit of a conundrum because logically you'd think the two don't go together. But I think they do. We humans are omnivores. Some people will say we're not, but we are. We eat meat and we eat vegetables. And we're also parasites on this earth. We, like a parasite, we are a creature that destroys where we live, which in the end actually destroys ourselves. But unlike viruses and worms and other parasites, we're also intelligent beings. So we can use our intelligence to correct the mistakes we make when we see we make them, and we can hopefully fix the environment and still have our cake and eat it too, because I mean, who wants cake and just sit and look at it? I mean, you want to eat it, right? So we gotta adjust what we do so that we can have it all, and we do have the ability to do that. So all my sheep here on the farm, all the ones that stay here, are pets. They're living, they're livestock, they're domestic farm animals, basically meat animals, although wool is a byproduct. But nowadays, in the 20th century, meat is the primary purpose of sheep. A couple of hundred years ago, wool was the primary product from sheep, and meat was the extra bonus. But not today, with our development of synthetic fibers and the discovery of cotton. All these things have put wool on the back burner because it's a much more expensive product to make and produce. So we're left with the meat thing. My theory is that if we didn't eat meat at all, every single one of these animals would have to be destroyed. That means sheep, chickens, cows, pigs, goats, because at that point they would have no purpose at all. And to me, life would be terrible without these animals. So in my view, and how I justify it, is that we keep some of them. We have them around so that they are still on the earth. They're not an extinct species. We can love the ones we have, but a portion of them will go for meat. And the meat is not for waste. It's to feed ourselves, which people will argue we don't need, but we do enjoy it. The only way I can have them here is to send a certain proportion off for meat. And that is what most farmers do. We have a lot of breeding stock here, so I'm lucky that a lot of these guys go on to other farms. But meat is the industry, and to get meat animals, you have to feed them. And to have breeding stock, you have to feed them. To have anything grow correctly and to its full potential, you have to feed them. And with sheep, like I said, it's grass. But the way the world's going, it's getting drier and drier and drier. So grass is not always the practical option either. So today I'm just going to talk about what we do that maybe supplements the grass thing and why we do it this way. A lot of people won't agree with it. You don't have to give a thumbs down. I don't get the thumbs down thing. It's just my opinion. Thumbs down is kind of like somebody who I don't know who you are, who can't give me a valid argument against it, but they put the nasty thumbs down in the video. I totally don't get it. But to each his own. When I don't like things, I just don't watch it. But I'm going to go see the lambs now and sit in the field with them, and we'll talk about grass and other feed sources to produce animals that grow quickly with good muscling, healthy animals, which is what farmers and consumers all want. So we'll say goodbye to Gladiator for now. Oh, while I'm in this pen with Gladiator, feeding sheep starts with a fresh source of clean water, not dirty water covered in scum or dirty feeders. It's got to be clean. So our drinkers are like this. it's something I do every day. I go around to make sure that they're clean. And winter and summer, they drink a lot. It will prevent stones. It helps in digestion. And they need water. A sure way to get a sheep sick or off their feed is to have dirty water around, because they won't drink it. And the other thing is salt and mineral. Some of the feed that you're feeding may be lacking in both, or it may not be. If it's not lacking, the sheep will not come to these salt and mineral feeders. But if it is, you can guarantee that they'll be here. And at certain times a year, and at certain times in their cycle, whether they're having lambs or breeding or whatever, they will go through more of the salt or mineral depending, and they do self-regulate. So we have loose salt and mineral, clean again, in every pen, so they can do what they want, and we don't have to worry about it. We do not mix it in the feed, and the reason for that is, like I said, if they don't need it, you're either A, gonna waste the money and put it in there and they're gonna eat it. But if they don't need it and it's in there and they can taste it, it also will put them off their feed. They won't eat it, and or if they do eat it, they may have too much. Again, it's really a balance, and to keep it simple, just put it here. There's money in mixing it in the feed if you get someone to do it for you. So just buy it in a bag and stick it in the feeder. Keep it simple. So we're out in the lamb pasture right now, and this is what sheep want to eat. It's grasses and clovers and dandelions and all kinds of natural grasses like that. And that is what, in an ideal world, sheep would eat. Their bodies are designed for processing this, and they will do really well on this. Like I said before, in Canada where we are, it's not always possible. Well, it's never possible for them to be out on pasture all the time, just because of our climate. For a good portion of the winter, our pastures are covered in snow. Another portion in early spring and late fall, the pastures will be frozen off and get mucky, like I told you in another video, where the grass gets kind of moisture laden, and it's just not palatable to them anymore. They need that scratch. They need some coarse stuff in their rumens in order to digest properly and stay healthy. And in the summer, if it gets too hot, even with the most well-managed pastures, by rotating them, which is what we do, and I have to admit, pasture rotation is fantastic. It does keep the pastures alive, and it allows the sheep to go out grazing a lot longer than they would if you didn't do that. But nevertheless, if you have a really dry summer, your pastures are gonna get to the point where they go dormant and won't grow at all for regrowth, or they'll get so low that the sheep will be eating too close to the ground. They'll be picking up parasites, and then parasites is a whole other can of worms. Anyway, so inevitably as farmers in this country and in many other countries around the world, we do have to supplement our animals if we want them to thrive. If they were wild animals, a certain percentage would die off in those conditions. But yes, we are shepherds. We don't want our animals dying off because we like them and because they are our source of income. So for both reasons, we want the sheep to do well. So that means supplementing. And the natural supplement would be hay, which you've cut yourself and stored for times when they do need extra. And hay is just basically grass. It's grown long and it's been harvested. So hay is grass. It's a natural source. If you call your animals grass-fed and you feed hay, you're not lying. When you have a highly prolific breed, which is producing a lot of lambs, such as maybe Rito Arcots, Romanoffs, anyone that's consistently producing twins and above, they're going to need a lot more in their diet to maintain the ewes condition to help it produce milk, so that the lambs also will thrive and grow well. And also, if you have a fast-growing muscular sheep like Suffolks, like what we have, those also require more feed. And yes, you could do it on pasture, but the thing with pasture, it is going to slow the growth down, because unless you have extremely lush pastures, you're going to be supplementing either with extra hay, or in most cases in farming, you're going to supplement with grain or corn silage. Corn silage is also grain. Some people say, I don't feed my sheep grain, and they feed corn silage, not realizing that the corn silage could have 4 tons of grain in every batch. So if you're feeding corn silage, you're feeding grain. It's just a different type of grain. So like I've mentioned in previous videos, we feed grains that are grown on our farm. So for the lamb ration, this is the lamb ration here. You like that? In it, you'll see the corn is cracked. It's not ground to a powder, but it's just cracked. We have a grinder mixer which will crack it up, and there will be some whole pieces in there as well. There's also barley in here, which we grow, and here it looks like it's hard to find the pieces of soybean. I guess the grinder kind of mixes it up a bit, but we have our own roasted soybeans in here as well. So the mixture that we use for these guys, it totals a 16% ration. And basically, we're mixing it by the ton. I think it might even be by 2 tons. So it's 2/3 corn, 1/3 barley, and the soybeans, we put 10 bags in the 2 tons. So whatever that proportion is, but our feed store has checked it out, and that makes a 16% ration. That's what we feed the lambs. We feed it as needed, so when they're really little and not eating a lot, we'll put a little bit out, but the key is to keeping it fresh. If it's sitting in a trough and kind of gets musty, again, it's gonna get a smell and dust, and rodents and birds and stuff might be walking through it. So like everybody and every animal, you want to have things clean. So dirty feed is a turn off. It will make them eat it less. So we start off little. If there's feed left over at the end of the day, we will cut back on the amounts we're giving. And if it's all cleaned up really quickly, we know to increase how much we're giving them. And that's how we judge it. Basically, we like to have our troughs with food in it all the time. You will never come to our farm and find the feeders empty. Because if they were out in the pasture, a healthy pasture, they would have access to that grass all day long, so they would nibble all day long. And that's how it is here. So if the troughs are empty, you probably need to feed more. If they can't eat it up in a day, maybe you need to feed less. So what we try to do is have it so that each day we are feeding fresh feed, which would be cleaner and more palatable for the sheep. Now, the grain ration for the adults gets changed. We don't breed our ewe lambs until they're over a year old. So they're adults at that point and fully grown to their potential. We find breeding earlier than that, you'll never get the size, unless you're a real heavy feeder, that we get by just waiting. Same with weaning the lambs. We leave the lambs on their mom as long as possible, which for us is usually 3 months. If we had the space, we'd leave ewe lambs on even longer. And we do that for several reasons. One, it is a much cheaper alternative because mom is feeding them, not you. Number two, the lambs will suck the moms dry to the point where they have very little milk left whatsoever. And when that happens, the lambs will wean themselves, and the mothers are way less likely to develop mastitis at weaning, which we've found to be a big problem, especially with these Dorsets. Our Suffolk's not so much, but for some reason the Dorset and the Dorset-Rito crosses, udders are a big issue. We have to watch the udders carefully for mastitis. So we want the mums sucked out and as dry as possible. We don't use cedars, and we don't like to use drugs to dry them up. We do like to keep things as natural as we possibly can, and it is possible to avoid using drugs if you do things correctly. Now, I understand that for the accelerated lambers, they want to take the lambs off and breed those ewes straight back, so they probably do have to use those drugs, but we're not doing that. Don't like to push them that hard, because I do have that animal lover in me where the ewes do need a break. So we give them a few months break before we put the rams back in with them. So the adults will just be fed a mix of hay. If we're flushing them to breed, we will have alfalfa hay for them, which is a little higher in nutrients and helps to flush them. And as you've seen Arnie doing, we'll feed whole corn. And depending on their condition, they can get up to 2 pounds a day, which would be a pound in the morning, pound at night. That would be the most we would be feeding. And if they're in good condition already, we may feed no grain. So it's again always touching and feeling, looking at the backbone. If you see a backbone, you got to feed her more. If she's nice and smooth like this lamb here, she's probably good. And these guys are pouting a little bit now because they're not getting any green at all. Another thing is that sheep are grazers, not browsers. Goats are browsers. And some sheep breeds will browse a little bit more than others. Like Dorpers will browse quite a bit more. But a grazer means that they're eating off the ground, eating grass. Browsing means that they'll eat just about anything. They'll go for tree leaves and scrub brush and stuff like that. But sheep basically want to keep their heads down. So that's also why they're more suited for grass, being grass-fed. That being said, a lot of people, because of the environment and soil issues and drought issues and stuff, have been trying different feed sources for the sheep, like sorghum and turnips, putting them out on fields of turnips, and growing corn and cutting the green off and letting the sheep go in and eat the stalks, or even letting them go in and eat standing corn, which is all great. Sheep will do it if they have to, because they do want to survive, but grass is still the better alternative, because that is what they're made for. When feeding those other sources like corn, standing corn and stuff, you do have to realize that corn is an extremely expensive crop to grow. The seed costs a lot, and the planting and the fertilizer, it is a crop that requires a lot of fertilizer to do well, which as a feed source, having the sheep graze on it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. People do it, but I think you're better off growing more pastures if you want the sheep to eat in the fields. Turnips, same thing. But turnips are good for loosening the soil, so if you're doing it to loosen your soil and want to put the sheep on it, great, because it's vitamin-rich leaves and stuff, and that can work. But yeah, and in other countries that may be your only source of feed. Like maybe pastures just don't exist. There are no hay pastures. Or if you're in the UK, you can't grow corn. It's just too wet and damp and cold. The UK is an ideal climate for sheep because they have pastures pretty well year-round. So that's where most of the sheep breeds come from, and that's why, because they are well suited for sheep. Other countries will have to find their own feed sources, whatever that is. But it's basically trying to find those grassy type feeds, and nutrient-rich feeds, which are some of the weeds, even like dandelions are a high source of nutrients, even though it's not a crop that a lot of farmers want growing in their fields. But if you want happy, healthy, bouncy sheep like this, every farmer wants to see that they have nice stock. It all comes down to feeding them correctly, and not limiting them. Feed them what they can eat. They will not get fat on grass. They will get fat on grain. So you can cut back grain if they're getting overweight, but they won't get fat on grass.